When you're just getting started with game development in Unity, you're probably quite busy following a tutorial or two learning about all the cool features of the engine in C#. Then you start working on your own projects and you eventually start feeling limited with what Unity has to offer. Maybe you've learned about some cool programming concepts that you're having trouble working with in Unity, such as interfaces or properties. Or perhaps you're working on a game and find that it takes a lot of time to create content that really should be pretty simple and fast to make. Or maybe you're a true programmer and just love optimizing things or setting up perfect environments for yourself and others to work in. In any case, this is where editor scripting comes in. Editor scripting allows you to modify the Unity editor in a lot of different ways. It can be used to make things look neater in the inspector, let you interact with your scripts in a different way, create custom windows, change the behavior of the scene view, make your own UI, create whole level editors, and much more. So now you're probably thinking, this dude on the internet seems pretty hyped about editor scripting, and I guess it sounds kinda cool. And you're right, it is cool. As a tribute to its coolness, I'll make a series of tutorials where I go over various concepts that I find relevant and I'll explain how to use them. The videos will not be dependent on each other, and they each teach their own concepts, so you can watch any video at any point and take something useful and actionable from it and use it to speed up your own development. That said, the concepts covered will be more and more advanced as we progress. If you're a beginner and just want to learn a bunch of stuff, I suggest you start at the first video and then just go through as far as you like. You can take a break at any point and then return when you're ready for more. Before jumping into it, I just want to say a few general things about editor scripting and making your own tools. When learning, you should definitely just have fun with it and try to do whatever you feel like. Take everything I show you and tweak it to your heart's content. Try to stretch it as far as you can and find all the fun little quirks and things you can do with it. When using it for an actual project though, it's very important that you think about which problem you're trying to solve before you start solving it. When you have just learned about something new, it's very easy to want to go overboard and just use it everywhere, even if it's not actually the best solution. Sometimes you can feel like you have the perfect idea for the perfect solution, but it just won't be worth the time and effort. When making a game, you should always keep in mind that you want to do the work that matters and don't do the work that doesn't. Not even AAA studios can make perfect games because they need to actually publish it someday. I find that there generally are two different broad cases for using editor scripting, and they each require different considerations. Most of the time, your scenario will fit into both cases, and then you just have to think about the problem from both angles. The first one is about speeding up development by automating tasks and building tools. This one is the simplest one to understand. You simply need to consider how long the task currently takes to do and how many times you do it over the course of the project. Then you need to compare that to how long it will take to make the solution and how long the task will take to do after you've made the solution. Now, a special note on building tools, especially big ones like level editors, is that you probably will want to make it as wide and multi-purpose as possible. But that's generally a mistake, as most features that you implement probably won't actually be used in the end. It's much better to be more conservative with things like this and only implement things when you actually need them. The second broad case is about restricting options and making things more clear to avoid mistakes. A big part of coding, once you get a bit more advanced, consists in limiting yourself as much as possible so you don't accidentally do something dumb. The same ideas can be enforced with editor scripting, which will make the environment a lot more robust and free of errors. Accidentally doing something you're not supposed to can create little errors that you might not detect and don't know where it came from. It can cause lots of frustration and hours upon hours of debugging if it's a really deep problem. This one is way more difficult to make a proper decision about, as it's not just a simple matter of comparing time spent. But here, the amount of people working on the game makes a huge difference. If you're going to have multiple people, even just two, you need to be extremely careful about making anything that could be misunderstood and used incorrectly. No matter how much you try, other people will never understand all of the quirky details of your code. If you, for example, have a person who is balancing monster stats in the game, and it would break something fundamental to set the damage to 0, then don't allow him to set the damage to 0. Even if you tell him, he will forget, especially if there are a lot of these little things to remember. It's much better to just never allow him to do in the first place. But, of course, putting in these restrictions comes at a price. Sometimes you're in a situation where it would be a really big task to find a solution. In these cases, it could be okay to just let everyone know what they're not allowed to do. Depending on the situation, you could put a big red label onto the UI saying what people shouldn't do. If this happens a lot though, it could also be a sign that your fundamental code structure isn't as good as it could be. It also often happens that you're in a situation where the risk of misunderstanding is really small but technically still possible. Here you want to remember that you never will be able to make it completely perfect. It will always be possible to screw something up no matter how hard you try, so save your effort for the cases that actually matter. Now, if you're the only person working on the project, you can afford to cut a lot of corners because you know about them yourself. You can of course still mess things up, but the risk is much smaller than it is when someone else is working too. Cutting corners like this can definitely still cause big problems though. For example, if you come back to the game after a longer break, or if you decide to bring in a second person after all. It could also be if you want to show off your game in your portfolio at some point. As a final note on this, you can afford to not be super strict with enforcing the right use of your code if you've made it protective enough. That is, if you have made the code on the assumption that people accidentally will misuse it. Proper use of error messages can be a huge time saver and definitely shouldn't be ignored. Now, as you can see, there can be many variables influencing the decision of whether or not to use editor scripting in a certain scenario, especially if you're trying to do something that falls under both categories, which you often are. You'll just need to practice your ability to make these decisions. A good way to get better at this is to track how much time you spend on making different things. This will make you more aware of what the actual cost of doing something is. That's all for now. I look forward to seeing you all in the first video, which will be about using some of the tools that Unity already has provided us with. See you then.